welcome everybody. Thank you very much for being here. We have a wonderful guest tonight. But first off, it's Hump Day Happy Hour. I'm Chad Duplantis. This is Dr. Jennifer Bell. JB, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thawed out. Hopefully I'll have power the whole time.
Goodness.
Hopefully I won't give our good friend Deuce a little bit of vertigo tonight, because last week apparently I was a little upsetting to Deuce. Yeah, a little jumpy. So JB, tell us about your week. What happened this week?
Well, first off, what are you drinking?
For all of my friends that were making fun of me last week, I have a Basil Hayden Old Fashioned with the real official cherries that I ordered.
It was embarrassing, frankly. When you show me that bright pink Old Fashioned, it was embarrassing.
Well, do you realize that all the grocery stores were like closing and I had minimal choices?
You don't make your own.
A maraschino cherry in it, or however you say that, but that's what I had to do. I got to do what I got to do. So anyways, tonight I am official. So there you go. I mean,
finally.
Took me a while to make. I poured it right before the show. So
we need to send a picture of that to Nachos, because I'm pretty sure even though you may have won the challenge, you went down a couple notches on your.
I'll take it. I don't care. I don't care. Deuce, did you hear that, man? It's Basil Hayden, and I've got the real cherries, buddy. There you go. So what are you drinking tonight, JB?
Oh, I always do white. My dad came to visit me at the office today, and he said, so let me get this straight. We have a beer drinker, a red wine drinker, and a white wine drinker, because my mom definitely joined the Facebook group. So now they're talking me. Hey, mom and dad.
Hey.
I told them to watch the first 15 minutes because the rest is really boring to them because they're not dentists. So tonight I'm drinking white wine in honor of my dad, who would expect nothing less.
And your maiden name was what? Satterfield? Sattenfield.
Yeah.
Well, here's to Mr. and Mrs. Sattenfield. So thank you for joining us tonight.
They also delivered quite a treat today because, so quick backstory, I'm from Lexington, North Carolina, which is self-proclaimed perhaps the capital of barbecue, at least in North Carolina and much of the Southeast. I will concede that it is a particular type of barbecue, different from Texas, so don't even get me started on that.
I think our guest would argue that.
I know this is going to be contentious. I am very aware of this, but let me digress for a minute. Lexington style barbecue is shoulder only, which I prefer over our Eastern friends who like the whole hog with all the veins and the fat and all the other stuff. And it's a tomato and vinegar based sauce, but it's real thin. It's not like Texas where you have the thick sugary coating. It's much more of above a marinade. So my business partner, who was throwing shade at me all the last couple of weeks about the fact that I've never taken her to the barbecue festival in Lexington, posted on Instagram how I've never taken her there. Well, my parents follow us on Instagram and decided that if I couldn't come through on the promises of our hometown, they would. So tonight they bestowed upon my family and her family a full barbecue dinner, all the fixins. We even have barbecue slaw, which y'all have probably never seen. It's a red slaw, but it was delicious. Plates were cleaned, bellies were full and happy. So I'm just really happy right now. I feel the love of home and the comfort food and all the things that come with that.
You know, that's a very heartwarming story, but there's something that I just learned about you, that when you start talking about home, your accent goes to a different part of North Carolina than I've ever heard before. You know, my business partner, he's really good about that. When he's around country folk, he starts talking real country. But you just got real backwoods on me. So I'm very proud of you and I'm very impressed.
Well, thank you. I did grow up saying Selman and Diddy. So,
yeah,
I mean, it didn't come far, you know?
I'm very impressed. So what do you got in the news for us this week?
Well, how was your week first? Can we hear? Was your week okay?
My week has been crazy. We were off all last week. hit the ground running on Monday morning. Started off with molar endo, which is not really my favorite thing to do, but I'll do it in a pinch. You know, just been blowing and going, working through lunch basically. And, you know, it's one of those days where some people say, thank God it's Friday. Tomorrow I will say, thank God it's Thursday, because Friday is a different kind of work. We haven't, knock on wood, because my heart goes out to all the people that did have a lot of problems. We were very fortunate. We didn't have any busted pipes that we know of yet. And we're in good shape here at the homestead, and we were in good shape at the office. And I know that can't be said about a lot of dentists. So
Do
if you're
you
watching,
feel like most of the
have
dentists in Texas are climbing out, or is it 50-50? Like, what's the situation down there right now?
It was 72 degrees today. So, you know, we have schizophrenic weather for sure. You know, everybody, I don't know of anybody in Texas that worked last week. If somebody did, then kudos to you, because we just really couldn't. But everybody is back at it this week, as far as I know, except for those that had office problems. We have a guy in a neighboring town, and his whole office flooded, and a bunch of people reached out to him and let him, you know, shelter his patients in their practices. But, you know, there were a lot of horror stories, but I'm just glad we're back and we're safe.
Well, hopefully you guys will continue to take care of one another and dig
Yeah,
up
we will. That's what we do.
mess. That's right. Whatever mess you have left. And then it was 68 here today. I mean, it was beautiful. And unlike your snowy weather, we've just had rain on rain on rain on rain. So we're kind of flooded at this point. And guess what? It's supposed to rain tomorrow and all weekend. So
I heard that. I have a friend that's taken her daughter to a soccer tournament in North Carolina this week, and she's like, it's supposed to rain every day. I said, those poor people have had rain every day.
Well, and the rain won't be the problem. It's the field condition that is already there, because we've had so much rain. While you were having all that in snow, we had all of that in rain. And so
yeah, they're playing on turf fields, and it's and so it's rain or shine.
Wait, what
so,
city?
Greensboro.
Yeah. Far. About an hour from here.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, you ready to talk about the news?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the news, because I want to see what's going on in the dental world.
Okay. Well, so a couple of things actually hit my feed today. So I want to talk about that first, because it sounds like it might be something we're all kind of managing and dealing with. So Dr. Bicuspid posted today about, in his news feed, about 1 out of 12 dental hygienists have left the field altogether. And then the ADA and ADHA also posted today about kind of they're doing a webinar and a discovery series on the fact that dental hygiene has been disproportionately relocated, I guess, in COVID. And so let's talk about a couple of the parameters that are associated with that. So in the survey that was put out through, I believe it was through the Journal of Dental Hygiene, or at least they published the data. But out of that came several pieces of key information. One was the fear to return to work. And I think dental hygiene in particular had maybe an increased level of fear to return. The other was, in general, women, and the dental hygiene profession is 98% female, which I didn't realize was so. I mean, I knew it was predominantly female, but I didn't realize it was 98%. We had talked about months ago how disproportionately women had been affected by COVID in the work field. Almost 800,000 women, close to 1 million, had been unable to return to work. And a lot of that is because they had to stay home and take care of kids whose husbands maybe couldn't, or had to have special conditions for that, or were caring for parents and couldn't return to a job that might put them at risk for contracting COVID. So I think that that's an interesting phenomenon, because I don't know how you felt, but I would have said 12 to 24 months ago, there was a glut of hygienists on the market looking for jobs, that the schools were pumping out a lot of graduates looking for work. And in some cases, we had more applicants for that position that we would post, more than dental assistants or admin. I think we're going to see a change. And I think If we have open positions, I think it's going to be more difficult to find qualified candidates to take the jobs. I also think it may force employers to start to consider other challenges that come along with helping females come back into the workforce and managing childcare issues at the same time. So, we'll continue to look at the data and post it out as we can, but I think it's, I think it's an interesting piece of data that we're going to have to consider as we continue to try to move back to 100% production in our practices, which hopefully in the next 6 months, most of us will realize. I also think that it would be interesting to see how many female dentists also respond to a similar survey about challenges that have come from that, because I'm a 2 female doc office, and I can tell you that we've definitely had challenges with the return to work. So anyway, came out in 2 different news feeds that I follow pretty closely, and I thought that was interesting and might impact, our fellow dentists who tune in on a weekly basis.
That is definitely interesting. And what it tells me is it's kind of like the airlines, there's going to be a pilot shortage in a few years, big time. And I believe there's going to be a hygiene shortage in a few years, big time. So if there are people that are looking for a profession, hygiene is definitely a great profession to go into, because obviously as the demand goes up, their asking price is going to go up as well. And I think that that's something that we need to be prepared for. And I just hope that insurance companies are listening as well. So,
and it's been on the top 10 jobs in Forbes for a decade or 2 decades, whatever, because for, a 2-year post high school degree, it is a well-compensated field. I do think that because it's heavily female employed, that it's posing some interesting challenges in scenarios like pandemics and other things that kind of put a lot of pressure. I mean, a lot of the, we definitely had 3 females who were out on maternity leave during COVID. 1 has not returned. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that then you have to find adequate childcare, and they aren't going back to school on a full-time basis. And then if you have a husband who's traveling still or working, there's just so many different nuances that you're trying to balance. So anyway, I thought that was really an interesting piece, and certainly will impact whether you're female or male. It impacts who you're employing on a daily basis. So the other thing that I thought was interesting about that survey that's worth mentioning is, of the dental hygienists that they surveyed, only 3.1% had actually contracted COVID, which is just slightly statistically higher than the average population, but still much lower than most healthcare professions. So if the fear of returning to work because you're going to contract COVID, it would seem thus far that has not been realized in practice. And I do think that piece of it is at least worth mentioning. We can't control the schools or childcare or virtual school and all the other things that we're balancing, but it certainly would seem that the PPE parameters that we've always had in place and the tightening up of those items are continuing to make our professionals safe. So that was a pretty good statistic to see.
JB, real quick, I'd like to say I noticed that she was watching, but Grace from Dental Mommies in Business.
Mommy Dentist in Business,
yeah. Mommy, I probably said it wrong, but she would be great to get on in a few weeks again and talk about that, just because she deals with so many mommies in the workforce, and I'd love to hear her thoughts on it. So I think that would be really a good point of discussion in a few weeks. So
it continues to be an ongoing challenge, and it's different from maternity leave and the other things that maybe have existing business models that you can kind of pull from. There is no help when it comes to pandemic issues because there's no history, right? So we're making it up as we go, and feeding off of one another in real time to figure out how we're managing it. So I think that's a great idea. And to answer the question that came in, they did not contract COVID through their office. So anyway, that's worth mentioning. Another interesting thing that came out this week was that there's a new strain in California, at least predominantly what they're seeing in California with new tests that are coming out for COVID. They do have a new strain. So I don't want to get super fringy, but let's talk for a minute. So a new strain's been identified in California. They are showing that it is more contagious. And I was listening to a virologist and pathologist a few weeks ago who noted that that's the proper evolution of a disease, is that it will go from less contagious but very deadly to more contagious but less deadly as the evolution of the virus moves along. So you could look at the Spanish flu, you could look at lots of other viruses that we have, and including the flu virus, the traditional flu, as it has existed in the human population over time. In theory, the virulent strand becomes less deadly, maybe more contagious, but less deadly. So I think that's interesting that they're starting to see that the strand in California is more contagious. I can't correlate whether that will then mean that it's less deadly, but it certainly has been suggested from folks way smarter than me that that is the natural evolution of a virus and that it will move to more contagious, but in theory, it should become less deadly and less, an unfortunate thing to contract, if you will.
So I'll take more contagious but less deadly for 500, JB.
I'll do double jeopardy on that one, actually.
Yeah. I've got a point of conversation that I'd like to bring up towards the end of the show that regards around a news topic that I sent you, because I think it would be a good talking point.
Oh, yeah.
But I know we've got our guest waiting in the wings, so let's hold off on that last story till the end.
You got it.
I am going to introduce our guest. This gentleman I've known for, I don't want to give away my age, but I've known him for 25, 26 years. I was just a peon dental student when I first met him. But Dr. Robbins practices dentistry in San Antonio. I think he said he is not full-time anymore, but he is also an adjunct clinical professor in the Department of Comprehensive Dentistry at the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio Dental School, which last I checked is the #1 dental school in the nation, which just means that they only did that survey one time, and that's the way that it ranked. He graduated from the University of Tennessee Dental School in 1973, did a rotating internship at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Leavenworth, Kansas, and a 2-year GPR at the VA Hospital in San Diego. He has published numerous articles, lectures all over the world, co-authored a textbook called Fundamentals of Operative Dentistry, A Contemporary Approach. And I think the textbook that most of us have heard about most recently is Global Diagnosis, A New Vision of Dental Diagnosis and Treatment Planning, which was also, they were both published by Quintessence. He's won several awards, including I'm probably going to say this wrong, but 2002 Texas Dentist of the Year. I won't say that wrong. 2003 Honorary Thaddeus V. Wecklew. Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. The Fellowship Award from the Academy of General Dentistry, the 2010 Saul Sluger Award given by the Seattle Study Club, and the Southwest Academy of Restorative Dentistry 2015 President's Award, and the 2016 Academy of Operative Dentistry Award of Excellence. He is a diplomat of the American Board of General Dentistry, past president of the American Board of General Dentistry, the Academy of Operative Dentistry, the Southwest Academy of Restorative Dentistry, and the American Academy of Restorative Dentistry. Obviously, this guy is pretty well accomplished, and it is an honor to know him and an honor to have him on the show. Dr. Robbins, how are you, buddy?
It's great to be with both of you guys tonight. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Well, we were so excited, and I have to give a special shout out to all of our really good friend, Dr. Eric Rindler out of San Antonio, because he kind of waved his magic wand and called Bill and said, I didn't want to tell Eric that I probably could have done the same thing, but I mean, I just want to give Eric the credit. But
give him a moment. Give him a moment.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rindler. So, Bill, tell us a little bit about your journey in dentistry beyond your bio.
You know, it's dangerous to ask an old guy about what he's been doing for the last 50 years in dentistry. So you ask that at your own peril.
I did, but that's why I asked it.
All right. So actually, I do enjoy this story because it's about my family, actually. My grandfather was a dentist. My two uncles were dentists, and my father was a dentist. So I grew up in a dental community, and I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. So I don't really get what they're talking about with an accent, Jennifer. I don't get the accent from you.
It sounds totally normal, doesn't it?
It's not normal for me.
Right.
But I grew up in a dental family. In fact, our home and office were together where my dad practiced, you know. And so I hung out with my dad all the time. I was at his feet all the time. His patients loved him. He was a blue collar dentist, and his patients just loved him. And when I was growing up and I'd be hanging out with him in the office, especially when I got in dental school, one of his patients would say, you know, he'd walk out of the room. One of his patients would say, you know, in the country thing, son, you going to make a dentist? And I'd say, yes, sir, I'm going to dental school. And he'd say, if you're half the dentist your dad is, you'll be a hell of a dentist. And I heard that a lot. And they loved my father because he really was a wonderful man. And so I just assumed, I went to school in Memphis, which is only about 2.5 hours from Little Rock, where I grew up. And so I just assumed that after I graduated from dental school, I would go back and go to work with him. He had room, and that's what you did 50 years ago. And when I was a third-year dental student, he said to me, you know, I think you ought to look into these dental internships. And I said, I don't know what that is. What are you talking about? And he said, well, it's a place where you go for a year to a hospital and you learn what they have to teach you. And if at the end you enjoyed it, but you're ready to come home, then come back and go to work. And I said, well, okay, how do I do that? And he said, you go to the VA hospital, and there's one in Memphis, and you apply. I said, okay, back in those days, you did what your dad told you to do. So I went and applied, and I actually got into, it wasn't even called a GPR at that point. It's called an internship. And I went to Leavenworth, Kansas. And I thought Leavenworth, Kansas sounded like the worst place on earth to go to with all the prisons. But it turned out to be the center of the dental universe for the Veterans Administration at that time. It was affiliated with UMKC Dental School, and it had every residency there. You know, oral surgery, endo, pros, perio. It was a very rich learning environment, and I loved it. And it was one of those deals where we went through rotations. So you'd have 3 months as an oral surgery resident, and then 3 months as a perio, and so on. So during that year, I wanted to be each of those 4 things. And so at the end, I said, well, I mean, maybe I want to be a general dentist because I really like all these things. And so I had to pay a year back for that program. And during that second year, I applied for and got into the 2-year GPR in San Diego. So I moved to San Diego. That was a country boy going to the big city. And it was the richest 2 years of my life professionally. Everything I do today is influenced and impacted by what I learned in those 2 years. And when I finished the program, I had to pay that back also, and they had to send me somewhere to do it. There was no place in California, and that's how I got to San Antonio. I got to come back to the VA hospital in San Antonio, and so I was on my road in academics. And soon after I got back to San Antonio, I got an appointment part-time at the dental school, and I ultimately became director of the GPR at the VA in San Antonio. And that was my first real academic job. And by that point, I was hooked into that world. I loved academics, and I never went home. And the reason I love telling that story is because my father gave me a pass, and he didn't know what I needed to do, but he had a feeling that I needed to do something else before I came home. And he gave me this pass to go out and see the world, and I never went back. And I know that he would have enjoyed having me in the practice. I mean, we would have enjoyed working together, but it was never meant to be, because once I got into the academic world, that's what I loved. And so I spent the first 25 years of my career in academics. That was my first academic appointment as GPR director at the VA. I then joined the Air Force, and I wanted to live in Europe. So my wife and I went to Europe for a couple of years and then came back, and I was sort of second in command of the 2-year AGD program at Lackland. And then I left the Air Force and went to the dental school and became director of the AGD program at the dental school. So that's what I did for 25 years. And after 25 years, Jeff Rouse came to me. Jeff is a name that should be known to everybody.
Yeah.
he was one of my dental students. And he said, you know, if you ever decide to go into private practice, I'd love for you to consider going in with me. And in fact, I've got a spot that I'd like to offer you. And I never thought about leaving the dental school. I saw myself as an academic guy. And I went home and told my wife about it. And she hated the dental school because I was getting paid squat and I was there from 7 to 7, you know, running a residency program. She loved the idea of private practice and she was a hygienist. And so I left the dental school and, you know, turned in my tenure and went into full-time private practice about 25 years ago. And we went in with Jeff for about 4 years, and it was a very rich time in our lives. Jeff and I don't get to lecture much together anymore, but we're still very good friends. And we developed the global diagnosis system together and wrote the book together. And I ultimately he went back and did a process residency, and I built a little building, and that's where I am today in private practice. So I've had really the best of both worlds. I had a long time career as an academic guy, and then I've had the same length of career in private practice, and I love both of them. I really enjoy both.
Do you hear your dad come through, like when you're sitting chairside with patients or even in your academic world, do you hear yourself say things that you heard him say, you know, early in your life? Are there little bits of him that come out from time to time?
Yes, I think that's true. That's what my family tells me. We have a sort of a similar personality, and yeah, I think that's true. And the other person that sits on my shoulder a lot, I think it's also important to talk about who are those people that have really impacted you the most. And I know Jennifer, you and Chad have people. I know for you, Chad, that Chuck Wakefield is one of them, one of our very good common friends. And I've had a handful of people that have had a giant impact on me. And certainly my father, I'd say, was the most important. My mother also. They're both amazing people. But when I joined the Air Force, my boss ultimately was Jim Summit. And Jim was a colonel in the Air Force, and he was my boss in that 2-year AGD program. So I was under him as sort of second in the program. And that would be back in the mid 80s when that occurred. And that's how long Jim and I have been friends. And so he's actually the one, Jennifer, that sits on my shoulder and still whispers in my ear today. Like today, you know, I'm doing something that's not difficult. It's under the gingiva, and it's a hard place to get to. And I think I've gotten all the decay. And Jim is whispering, I don't think you've gotten it all yet. You know, you better get some dye out and find out, you know. And so I'd say Jim Summit, from a moral integrity, friendship point of view, is the person that's had the most impact on me. And he's still alive and well. He's retired from the dental school, but he's still doing well. And then the other person I think that would be a commonality for you and me, Jennifer, would be John Coys. And
100%.
Coys was the first world-class teacher that I had. And I didn't know him. I mean, the first time I heard him speak, I'd never heard of him. And I remember taking 23 pages of notes in that one day. And he was talking about things like biologic width that I was teaching residents and I thought I knew about, and I knew squat about it compared to him. And so he became, you know, that person for me that's had a giant impact. And Frank Spear is also a wonderful teacher. And I have indeed learned a lot from him, and more currently Kinzer. I think Spear and Kinzer are an amazing pair. But I'd say John Coys is probably the one that's had the most impact on me. And then the final one would be Jeff Rouse. Jeff is among the most talented dentists intellectually that I've ever been around. And when we first started together, I had experience as a speaker and he didn't. And I've watched him grow from a beginner public speaker teacher into, you know, among the best on earth right now. And so I've been blessed in my life with a lot of wonderful people. And those 4 that I mentioned, I think would be among the most important.
You know, I got a funny story to tell you, Bill. You were telling your story, and you and I, it must be kindred spirits, because I'm telling you, you're saying something, and I'm like, as soon as he's done with this, I got to tell him this story. So I'm going to tell you a story. When I was in dental school, I thought I wanted to go into oral surgery, and then I thought I wanted to go into endo, and then I thought I wanted to go into pros. And I had gone back to endo, and I went to go apply to endo and I said, I don't want to do this. So I go into Dr. Summit's office and I said, Dr. Summit, I'd like to ask you to write me a letter of recommendation. And he takes the sheet of paper and he puts it down on his desk and he looks at me and he goes, well, what do you want to do? And he goes, is it for endo? And I said, no, sir. And he goes, it's not. And I said, no. And he goes, well, I thought you were going into endo. I said, well, I never told you that. He goes, well, you just look like the endo type or something like that. I said, no. And he goes, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do an advanced education in general dentistry. He goes, with honor, I will write that letter. And he goes, I am so glad you chose to do that. And he says, well, he goes, what do you really want to do? And I said, I want to be the best general dentist that I could ever be. And he says, all right. And he goes, now, where do you want to go to your residency? He goes, you're going to go learn from Dr. Robbins? And I said, well, I'm applying there. And Douglas was doing the program at the VA, and I knew that you were still teaching there somewhat. And so anyways, I ended up getting into the Baylor, and I went with Chuck Wakefield, and the rest is history. But it's funny how all of the same people that we talked about run in the same circles, and it's just such a great story. So I appreciate you sharing that, and trust me, that's exactly what I was looking for. But what I want to get into, because you answered my first two questions through your story there, but tell me about this global diagnosis that you've been talking about and how that all came about, and why this is such a hot topic right now.
So back in the early 90s, when Coys and Spear were just becoming the thing, they were partners in practice together. They'd been residents together, and then they were partners in practice, and they were teaching together. And up until that time, complex interdisciplinary treatment planning cases were treatment planned on the articulator, on maxillary and mandibular cast mounted in centric relation. That's how prosthodontists treatment planned a patient, on an articulator. And Coys and Spear were the first to say that we should not be treatment planning from condylar position forward. We should be treatment planning from incisal edge back. And that was a radical and revolutionary idea back in the early 90s. And it was a little bit slow to catch on, and now it's become the standard. But when I first heard about it, it made such good sense to me. And I grew up in the world of nathology. I never could do it. I never could do a nathologic wax up that was very good using the drop wax technique with the different colors of wax and all. I wasn't good at it. And it turned out that it was all nonsense anyway. I mean, nobody could do it. And so when I came upon these guys that were so much more common sense, I was an early adopter. And then in about 1997, Jeff and I got together. That's when I went to practice with him. And we both started using facially generated diagnosis in our practice and started incorporating it into our teaching. And it was from Coys and Spear that this concept that was revolutionary changed my life also. And as Jeff and I worked with facially generated diagnosis, Coys and Spear's initial emphasis was on incisal edge position. That was the starting point. And Jeff and I felt like there needed to be an equal emphasis on gingival levels. And so global diagnosis is not meant to take the place of facially generated diagnosis. All the credit goes to Coys and Spear. Global diagnosis is additive to facial treatment planning, facially generated treatment planning, with an emphasis on the gingival levels. So it's a systematic approach of looking at that more complex interdisciplinary patient. And Jeff and I believe that there are 4 global diagnoses that dictate all interdisciplinary treatment planning. And we can make a diagnosis on any patient based on asking and answering only 5 questions. And so that's the sort of the short story of global diagnosis.
Well, and the thing I appreciated about it, much to your praise of Coys, I had never heard Coys before when I heard him the first time, and probably you felt similar. The systematic approach to diagnosis and treatment planning just made good sense, and it was very logical. I felt the same way when I sat through your Friday lecture. I'm sure you don't remember me then, but in Cary, North Carolina, the first time I heard you, it was a systematic and practical approach to looking at any facial aesthetic challenge and figuring out how you're going to get from point A to point B. And I frankly, I applaud you for being able to put it into pragmatic terms that an everyday clinician can take a 4 or 5 step question approach to being able to generate a treatment plan and also communicate to a patient how they're going to move them from point A to point B and the risks and pros and cons that are going to come along with that multi-step treatment plan. So my opportunity to applaud you as one of my mentors, unbeknownst to you, and to say that I appreciate such a pragmatic approach for GPs that are just looking for ways to be able to execute on a daily basis at a high level.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. And I'd also say that Jeff Horowitz is missing some great stuff right now, because he would be all over this. I mean, I know that he follows, that approach as well. So I'm really excited. And, I know that I'm going to post the link below tomorrow or this evening, but you have a study club on global diagnosis, do you not, that meets weekly?
Yeah, we do, as a matter of fact. And so there's a general dentist in Lawrence, Kansas named Jim Otten. And
Okay.
Jim has taught at the Pankey Institute for years. He's more recently taught at the Spear Institute, or the Spear Education in Scottsdale. So Jim is an amazing educator. And we've been friends for a long time. And we're about the same point in our career. We were starting to slow down a little. And we were thinking about 3 years ago, he and I and his wife and my wife got together for a weekend, and we were trying to figure out some type of consulting business or something that we could use in our later years to work with younger dentists in terms of diagnosis. We had all kinds of ideas, but we never could operationalize it. And during the pandemic, everybody's aware of Kirk Barrett and ACT Dental and the COVID relief conference that he put on. And he asked me to help with that. And so early on in that, I was involved. Every morning I would get up and it would be 5 hours. And I wouldn't be on all 5 hours every day, but I was on for a lot of it. And I gave quite a number of lectures on it. And so I had an audience that had never heard of me or seen me, and they saw me every day. And sometimes there would be 2,500 people at a time on, these lectures. And so, I got more exposure through that than I'd ever gotten before, because I'm not really a national level guy like Coiser Spear. I'm more of a regional.
Oh, baloney.
Guy. No, it's true. I'm more of a regional study club kind of guy, and I'm happy to be that. It makes me happy. But about a couple of months into that, in April, I called Jim up and I said, I think this is a perfect time for us to implement what we're talking about. Let's start a virtual study club. I mean, we've got this big group of people that have been seeing our faces. Let's start it. So on June the 5th last year, we started Global Diagnosis Education, which is a virtual study club. And we meet once a week, not every, we meet 3 weeks out of 4. And we generally will have a couple of hour and a half. They last an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes. We'll have a lecture with maybe some questions. The second time we'll have another lecture with more questions and answers. And then the third will be a workshop, and it will be treatment planning. And we have a template that we've created to be able to use the global diagnosis system, both from an aesthetic and a functional point of view. Jim's real expertise is in function. He's a TMJ occlusion expert, and I'm not that. And so our talents have really been a wonderful synergy that we come together to bring the function in with the more aesthetic side. And so we generally have 2 sessions a month where we have a lecture and 1 where we do more of a workshop. And Jim is really good at the behavioral side too, in the management of the office and the management of patients and behavioral styles and all that. And so it's just been a wonderful experience for both of us. And so, yeah, it's still open. What we do, we video all of the lectures. And so we now have a library of everything that's been done since last January the 5th. We have some guest speakers, obviously, along the way. We've had Jeff Rouse and others, Jim McKee as guest speakers. And so there is a library of what we've already done. So a person could come at any point and start, become a member and go back and look at the past videos and catch up. So that's become among the most favorite of my educational experiences of my life. Because my problem that I always felt is that when I go and do a study club like I did with you, Jennifer, or a meeting, it's 5 hours and I go and tell my story. And at the end, people think, yeah, that was cool. And then they go home on Monday, and change is hard because nobody is holding you accountable on Monday. Well, that's the difference between being in a study club, because there's an accountability. Those that are really taking this seriously, and we have about 160 members, and the members that really take it seriously are sending in cases that we're then going over, and they're implementing, you know, they're buying a Doppler, they're implementing the things that we're talking about. They're buying a Coy's dental facial analyzer. They've never had an articulator in their practices before, and now they do. And so that's the beauty of this and the real excitement for Jim and I, and that is we're starting to see real behavioral changes in our members, which I never see in the study club setting.
That gives you so much satisfaction as a teacher, you know, to have
payoff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I looked at it last night, and that was a question that I was going to ask you, was that if someone had not started from the beginning, would they be able to pick up midway? But I looked at it last night. I think it's $199 a month, I believe, and I think there was like $100 off on Kirk's website, like $99 a month. So
that's what it is right now. That's right.
Yeah, and so I'll put that link out there tomorrow and make sure we get some people over there. But you know, I just I wanted to say a couple of closing things. One is thank you for what you've done to dentistry. Thank you for being who you are and remembering me after all these years, because you know, and I know that we have a lot of mutual connections, but I think so highly of the people that you've run in circles with. And I don't know if you heard, but we're going to switch gears from dentistry for just a second. And right before you came on, Jennifer was talking about barbecue. And, you know, you grew up in Little Rock, you know your barbecue. You went to school in Memphis, you definitely know your barbecue. Granted, it's a different type of barbecue, but we're going to scratch that because JB's up in North Carolina. We're in Texas. We're not going to argue about barbecue because we know that ours is better. But what I am going to ask you is, when we go to San Antonio, where is the first place that you're going to take JB for Mexican food?
Oh, for Mexican food. Yeah, that's a better question than for barbecue. I have to have a couple of other questions answered, and that is, what are you there for? The food, the experience, number one, the ambiance, and number two, are you there for Tex-Mex, or are you there for more interior Mexican food? So
authentic.
Those two.
Authentic Mexican food.
Okay, authentic Mexican food. There's a brand new restaurant in San Antonio, and that's probably where I'd take you. It's called Frida's. Brand new, and it's high end. It's not far from my office too, so we could run by the office and have you didn't ask me what I was drinking tonight.
What are you drinking, Bill?
Nothing.
Nothing.
My wife won't let me drink during the week, but if we were doing this on Friday night, it would be a dirty martini with blue cheese olives. So
there you go.
That's my drink. All right. So we would go by the office, and my partner, Brad Beckel, makes a great martini. And then after we had the martini, we would go to Frida's and have a wonderful upscale Mexican restaurant meal.
All right.
Did you hear an invite, Chad?
I heard the invite. It's on. Trust me.
I heard it.
We're going to make it happen. And maybe, just maybe, we might bring Eric Rindler along.
I don't want to make any promises. And poor Jeff, maybe he wants to come along too. I don't know. You can't say.
Jeff's included in we. Yeah.
The thing about Eric is that Eric serves really fine wine. So if you come to my place, you're going to get a $15, $20 bottle of wine. If you go to Eric's, you're going to get a nice bottle of wine. So one night we get the martini at my office, and the next night we go to his backyard, which is beautiful, by the way. It's got a beautiful pool. And we sit out there all evening and drink wine with he and Missy.
I mean, this sounds like the perfect trip.
There's
no better place on the planet than San Antonio, Texas, period.
It's where I did our first year anniversary for my wedding. We went to San Antonio, New Braunfels. We did Green, Texas. I fell in love and splunking down in the
Yeah.
holes of Texas.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a great place to live.
It was
Fortunate.
phenomenal.
so Bill, as we close out, do you have another minute? Because I think you might enjoy this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So I wanted to close out with this tonight, and it was the last little bit of news. And Bill, I don't know that you've checked your. Okay, Eric Shire wants to join us too. I guess we could invite him too. Okay, fine. Let's have a big old party in San Antonio. All right, but I don't know if you checked your email today, but the Texas State Dental Board adopted the rules that were proposed last week. So. There were some changes that have been made. So JB, do you have them in front of you? There were just a few.
Yeah, well, I think the predominant
changes.
ones were modifying a little bit of the screening techniques coming into the office. So kind of lightening up on that a little bit. They also talked about you have a shorter window of time if you contract COVID. I think prior to it had been 10 days.
7 days now.
Now it's down to 7. It just felt like a little bit of loosening up, just in general, kind of pulling back some of the restraints. You can have magazines in your waiting room now, people, and toys. So you got that going.
You can also have, family members come in.
Correct.
Yes.
And they're saying you don't have to do a pre-rinse anymore. So
Yep.
they made quite a few, pullbacks from the more stringent recommendations.
It's interesting. So where I wanted to debate it is I just wanted to ask, and Bill, you practice in Texas, so you'll get this, but here's my take on it. First is that I have a staff member who I love dearly, and she's battling breast cancer. And I think it's of utmost importance because she's one of the first people that they meet in the office that we screen them appropriately prior to coming in, which they do the day before. So I feel that is something that we've grown used to, and we're kind of okay with it. And in her case, I'm going to keep it because it doesn't say you have to get rid of it. The other thing is selfishly, I kind of like the no waiting room thing. That's been kind of nice. It's worked on our flow in the office. The other thing is I really like the pre-rinse because we talked about that years ago as that being really important to dental care, and we kind of shied away from it, and now we're back to it. So I kind of like that. And all these rules come down today, and it's like we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for things to change, and I'm kind of like, wait a second, I was enjoying some of these, and so what are you guys' thoughts on it? And JB, when they lift it in your state, and Bill, what are your thoughts?
Will be the last.
I agree with you on some of it, although I don't agree on the waiting room.
Yeah.
I still don't like having to call patients in and all that. I'll be glad when we have the waiting room back. The other things that you mentioned, I tend to agree with. I think it makes sense to be to err on the side of caution, especially if it doesn't take any effort, which neither of those things really do.
No, I think it's a touch point, the day before, and I'm big on touch points with the patient. But when you call the day before and just say, hey, because just want to go through a few questions with you, not to bother you or be a nuisance, but we're just trying to keep everybody safe. Then they realize that you're being proactive about this. So I'm okay with that. Waiting room, I guess I could go either way. I know it is cumbersome to the team and everything like that, but I'll give that one up. But the other things I kind of like.
Yep, I agree.
JB?
Well, I like the waiting room because in exchange for the waiting room, we've been able to maintain our normal production. So I have a really small waiting room. And so if I had to queue everybody up 6 feet apart with their 4,200 kids that they bring in as well, I would only be able to see probably 50% of what we're able to do right now, just because of the spacing requirements. So if we can have the waiting room back to normal volume where people could sit in 3 to 4 feet proximity to one another, then I'm happy to open that back up. But I don't want that to be the rate limiting step if I'm doing all the other right things in the back of the house. I just happen to have a small, disproportionate waiting room. So, but it's also brought so much innovation to dentistry in general, and we're offering we've been forced to offer things to patients that maybe we've been reluctant to do, or we didn't want the cost to come along with that, you know, text to pay and other things that have allowed some flexibility for patients that I think, yeah, I don't know that will go away. I think it's provided. And frankly, we've actually been able to offer work from home opportunities for our front desk staff, which we would have never entertained prior to COVID. But we now have front desk people working from home, answering phones, working down a to-do list of patient communication and all that stuff without having to be physically in the office on a daily basis, and finding that that's an extremely productive way to utilize their time. So it's forced innovation, which I don't know what will stick and what will go away, but it's been kind of a, I don't know, an academic exercise in business school. So.
Well, I would agree. And I think on that note, let's just know that maybe this is a sign that not only did Texas thaw out last week, but maybe there's a glimmer of that light at the end of the COVID tunnel that we can all crawl out of soon and see each other once again. So let's close on that note. Bill, thank you so much for being here. You are so fantastic. You're such a light to so many, and we just thank you so much.
It was indeed a pleasure. It was just great. You know, we don't see each other that often, Chad, so it's really fun to actually see you. And Jennifer, it's obviously been a long time. So to see your lovely face. So thank you so much for the opportunity tonight. I really had fun.
Well,
thanks for coming on.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. And I'm just going to ask if you'll come back again.
It would be my pleasure indeed. Seriously, I love this. This is much more fun than this, you know.
Thanks, Bill. And good night, everybody. Thanks for watching. And I will post that link to the Global Diagnosis Study Club.